next bit of cultural input is a man who's done all three of our Lobby Daughter parties. He's become a bit of an institution. He's one of the big friends of the Lobby Daughter Statue Fund. I give you Walter McCorrisken.
The roast chicken, a family poem. Four wains wanted a leg apiece, then feather lost the heat. It's just a chicken I'm carving, no a centipede. I've not finished yet.
It was just too funny, but clever, but too funny.
He was a Prose pro. I mean, everyone knew that you would get that he would be hard to follow.
He just loved it. He really enjoyed, entertaining folk with his poems, with his wits, and as I say, it wasn't just the poems, but some of his stories and anecdotes and the rest of it were very, very funny.
He tuned into the sort of self-deprecating sense of humour that we Scots all seem to have in abundance.
I was quite happy to be introduced as Scotland's worst poet, but of course that title goes to McGonagall. McGonagall's not in the same league as Walter McCorrisken from my point of view, and I mean I never use anything from McGonagall, ever, but I use a lot of McCorrisken.
I think it was humorous intentionally, bad intentionally, so he was it was like the Marx Brothers, his smart men trying to act dumb.
Walter McCorrisken was born to John and Agnes in May 1926 in the Stirlingshire hamlet of Barnellen. He was schooled at Inchinnan and called up to military service shortly after leaving school.
Dad met my mother because he stayed on in Germany after the war. He wanted to help the people rebuild their lives, obviously, after the devastation. He stayed on with the Welsh Guards, which had a motto which said "Ich dien," which really confused the population because that means I serve. So why a British person was wandering around with German words on their uniform confused them. But he went to Göttingen University and learned German there, and that's where he met my mother. She was working as a nurse. My father came over, and then eventually, through whatever processes they did after the Second World War, my mother was allowed to come over and worked as a nurse, first in London and then up in Scotland.
Walter and Irmgard returned to Renfrewshire and married in 1953. Their son Richard came along in 1954, and the young family set up home in Blytheswood, Renfrew, first at North Lodge Road and later at Elm Avenue.
My father trained as a carpenter, but unfortunately he had asthma, and the dust from the wood made it impossible for him to work. So he looked for any sort of work they could get hold of. And at one time he was working in a pig farm, another time he was working as a grave digger, but he eventually got work at Glasgow Airport, and he was what we call a tug driver, moving the planes in and out of place. Father actually started work at Renfrew Airport, and he's a cleaner for the aircraft, and then eventually got the job driving the tug around.
Whilst working at the airport, Walter undertook some correspondence journalism courses, and from there began to dip his toe into short essays and cartoons for the British European Airways magazine.
He would write letters, or he would write little stories. So he was sure that he would have been doing something if it wasn't poetry. It was just that this seemed to be the thing that got him.
A real poem, First Grandchild. We wandered far in the morning time, your trusting hand so small in mine, to swings and boats in Summer Park, and fondled dogs who didn't bark. We fed soft ducks with shouts of glee as you bounced and wriggled on my knee, and later in the sun's warm beam we sat content and ate ice cream. Scotland's famous for inventing the television, but we also invented the internet as well many years ago, and it was originally called the Herald Diary, because the internet is obviously just a gobbledygook of daft photographs, bits of news and silly opinions, and that's exactly what the diary was and is and has been for a long time, even before the invention of the internet. So essentially it's just random silliness, basically a kind of collision of silliness, and that's why I think Walter found a home there for his poetry, because it was very, very silly.
When did I first meet Walter McCorrisken? Well, I can tell you where it was. It was in Glasgow. I don't quite remember what the venue was, but he was receiving the Scotland's Worst Poet award from I think it was the Glasgow Herald.
There was a competition basically for bad poetry, and Walter was like the Usain Bolt of bad poems at the time. Basically, Usain at his height, he basically just sprinted past everybody else. Everyone else was puffing and panting, coming in with kind of semi-all-right rhymes, but his rhymes just kind of went off the scale of being all wrong, and he basically romped home basically quite easily. Yeah, broke the 10-second record in bad poetry.
I remember thinking, oh hell, what is this? Because even a good songwriting competition or a good poetry competition can be a real dirge of a time, and the quality varies from very good to really dismal, and you get more dismal ones than the very good ones. So went along with some trepidation, met Walter, and my view of the evening changed, and also we were all taken by the ability of Walter McCorrisken. Scotland's worst poet? I don't think so. He was totally brilliant.
After the Herald competition, Walter became something of a draw in the folk circuit, publishing best-selling collections of his poems, and became a staple of television hogmanay and chat shows, appearing on Parkinson twice, alongside stars of the day such as Andy Williams and Lulu. For a spell, you would even find Walter on the side of a Glasgow Corporation Poetry in Motion bus, advertising a local carpet shop.
I put 5 pence into the bowl, then carefully looked about. Nobody was watching me, so I took a fiver out. You know.
Courtesy of then Renfrew MP Tommy Graham, Walter also made it into Hansard, twice.
A miser from downtown Ragoon drank soup through a hole in a spoon. Said he with a smile, it's really worthwhile, for the soup I save is a boon. That epitomises this government. That epitomises the Chancellor and his regime and how they operate.
He came on stage and he got the complete sympathy of the audience, who would kind of start, the ones that didn't know him, would start looking at their watches and hoping that this guy wasn't going to take too much of the time away from the stars.
How does that sound to you? Okay.
Within half a minute, he had everyone. He was a master at timing. His timing was incredibly good. He would almost act offended if people laughed at him, and that was, of course, the objective of his whole act.
They were wondering what they were going to get, you know, and when he started with a deadpan face, you know, so they're sitting very polite and the rest of it, so we'll hear this lad out, you know, and then they just get whacked with the punchline, you know, and then that was it. It was mirth from then on. Great.
He thought out his character so cleverly, because he gained the sympathy of the audience, and then he kind of set about destroying them. And it's no exaggeration to say he was brilliant on stage. He really was brilliant.
A wee man was telling me that his wife was ill, so I wrote a poem about his misfortunes. My wife is poorly, Walter. In fact, she's so unsteady, I've had to carry her down the stairs to get my breakfast ready.
Walter would never find anything he said funny. He would just be bemused at an audience, laughing and slightly annoyed.
That's not too deep for you.
When he was on TV, I was in what they called the green room with the other acts that were ready to go on. And without fail, when he was on stage, they were killing themselves laughing. They all thought it was hilariously funny.
Of course, Walter got television coverage through the Parky Show, and I remember him coming on to that, you know, with his bonnet and his scarf and his big coat, and looking like your typical West of Scotland working class man, just doing his stuff. Well, good evening. That's what I like to hear. We're all very keen Burnsians, and we know that Burns wrote loads and loads of stuff. But the other thing that Burns did, he inspired other poets. And one of the guys he inspired was Walter McCorrisken. One of the roles of the Robert Burns Royal Federation is not only to promote the works of Burns, but to promote Scottish literature. McCorrisken's at the heart of that. Going through a bookshop somewhere, I came across this Walter McCorrisken book. I went through it and I was in hoots of laughter. Absolutely brilliant. Because by that time I already enjoyed Burns, and Burns did a whole range of stuff, including loads of epitaphs. So what does McCorrisken do? Loads of stuff, including epitaphs.
The cremation of Jock McGuire, whiskey blender. He fell into a whiskey vat, took enough a while to die. He would have died far quicker had he no come out to pee.
If you think about Rabbi Burns again, talk about humorous poetry, I mean, Burns, although he wrote love songs, he also wrote about farting. Basically, so and how, did Byron do that? Again, did Eliot? Did none of these people did. I mean, so that there is like a bodiness and gaudiness in the Scottish lexicon, maybe. So maybe that's why he connected to it, because it's an earthy sort of language. It's not the language of lords. It's the language of not quite the gutter, but it's somewhere close to there. Certainly the pub just before you hit the gutter.
I often wonder when I read McCorrisken stuff where he starts, and I think he sometimes starts with the finishing line. He's got a good punchline. They say, "Now how can I work that in?" And he does one about a woman sitting in a rocking chair, and it starts out like something like, "A woman fell off her rocking chair, and folk they came to mock her." And then, dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum, they said she was off her rocker. Now, I think they said she was off her rocker, and then he worked his way back. Just like the one, First Aid, where he does the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and the woman swallows her teeth. What a great finishing line. You can't take it with you, but she did, because she swallowed my teeth. So I think he gets a finishing line, and then he works it back.
He was always interested in language of all sorts. Ways, the English language, the Scots language, the old Scots language, and he just liked the words and how some of them are quite apt from the old days, and it was just a basic love of being able to communicate, or saw the humorous side of language, how you could change it, how you could just mess around with a couple of words, and it was amusing for him.
You can see looking at me that I enjoy it. I mean, I love doing Burns. I love doing McCorrisken. I love doing Eric Bogle. I love doing Matt McGinn. Hey, these are all Scottish writers. They're all brilliant. He wrote the 23rd, or what he called it, the outstretched palm, no Sam. The Lord is my shepherd, in him I trust, to give me overtime. And when an extra shift crops up, oh Lord, it's surely mine. Forgive me, Lord, I know you well. It's seldom that I pray. I'm skint and I need the extra cash. The wife's a bit short tay. Oh Lord, in you I'll surely trust. I can't ask for more. For if I trusted other blokes, I wouldn't get my share. 1,000 times I scan the board, 1,000 times I go. And when I see a vacancy, I append my name below. Good Lord, I thank you, fae my heart. My mate's been sent hame ill. I'll score him after overtime, and I'll substitute mine. But when I take a heavy dram and stagger for a wall, please gird the bottle on my hip, in case that I should fall. Nae messing when I'm cod to him. my last shift for today. I hope it's on a Sunday, but then I'll get double pay.
Some of Walter's worst prose was brought to life by friend and illustrator John Gagan. We joined John at an artist's retreat he organised on Bute to find out when he and Walter first met.
He used to run a folk club in the airport. It was just off the airport. I think it was a flying club there. And it was a Sunday night once a month he used to do it. So it was the Battlefield Band at the time, an early formation of that band. So we pulled up there and we did a spot, and at half time, he would introduce it. At half time, he went up and he started telling these ridiculous poems. Absolutely, doubled over. I never heard anything like it at all, When I first met him in a professional capacity, it was through the Herald, through the work I was doing in the Herald, and he came up with his publisher, John, who introduced him to me at my studio on Bath Street. Was working at the time, and I was looking at the guy John that he was with. Now, Walter always wore a bonnet and a muffler. That was his trademark. And so the other guy, he had a bow tie and a bonnet, but there was something wrong with it because I kept staring at this guy, and the guy, as I soon found out, was very interested in woodworking. He had a wooden bow tie and a wooden bonnet. And that's what he walked about. So it's probably just as eccentric as Walter was.
Walter was looking for a publisher, and it was kind of hard to get a hold of. And I said, right, give me a shot of this stuff and I'll put it together.
It was quite strange because normally when you meet a client like that, you sit down, it's very businesslike, and you sit down and you go over the ins and outs of it, what's what the format's going to be, what the style of caricature is going to be, cartooning, which ones are going to be done. So all the technical stuff is done and you're sitting in an office doing this. Walter phones you and says, could I meet you at 11 o'clock in Paisley? That's fine. Whereabouts in Paisley? He said, the Bull, and the back lounge in the Bull pub in Paisley. So at 11 o'clock, and I went in there and Walter's sitting with a pint and a half, right? Half a whiskey and a pint, and he's got me one as well. So I said, Walter, I'm working this afternoon. Oh, no, we've got a lot to talk about, So I don't know what time it was in the late afternoon, rolling out of there, and go back and say, now, what did we talk about there? What were we going to do? So I had to phone him up, and, well, that's the way it went on, It was quite unusual, but it was good fun. It always had stories the whole time, story about everything, It was a really, really amazing guy.
They are all stoters. You could go through a load of them. Oh, here's one here. Herbert Brown, glass blower. Friend of many, a friend so true. Pity he sucked when he should have blew.
He told me the style he was looking for, right? I knew that. And it was very, very simple style, just straight to the point. He suggested some poems that were included there that may have he'd an idea how he visualised that as an amusing or humorous illustration to go with his humorous poems. So we worked very much together on that, yeah.
Piddle piddled in a puddle till the puddle reached his middle. We used to call our piddle scamp, but now we call him Rising Damp.
The only other thing I was going to mention was his Walter McCorrisken suppers. Has anyone mentioned that?
They were lovely nights. They were well appreciated by Rotary, from lots of Rotary clubs who got to know about Walter McCorrisken.
While I was working at the Herald, myself and Murray Ritchie, who I was working with at the time, were invited along to a Walter McCorrisken supper in Renfrew, right? So we went there, and the code of dress was bonnets and mufflers. So we turned up with the bonnets and mufflers at this Walter McCorrisken supper, which was run roughly on the organisational lines of a Burns supper, right? But there the similarity stopped. Instead of piping in a haggis, there was a stretcher with a massive clooty dumpling on it, right? So instead of being piped in, they asked me to bring my fiddle. I'd fiddled it in, and it was there, and it was Walter's stories, and it was amazing. It was surreal. It really was. That's the only way you could describe it.
He's the loveliest character, loveliest character. You couldn't fault him for swearing or, you know, it was just too clean. And it was good fun having him. You just knew that it was going to work out okay having Walter.
Talented woodcarver John even had a decent bash at immortalising his friend in the form of a bust.
When I look at these, they're just magic how I get to this. And I'm sorry we never got to putting a bonnet on him. Why did I pick Walter for it? He was just one of the stars. It had to be captured. If I couldn't capture him, I'll have a go at it. And we've had a go at it, and I don't know why we never got to finish it. But that's another story.
It was like a lot of sort of West of Scotland guys of his era, Glasgow and Paisley, whatever. They're ordinary guys, they're great to get on with, and they've got this wealth of humour in them, which they don't seek to go out and, you know, make a career of or make money from at all, but they just like to be there, entertaining. They probably started off doing it at parties, or doing it in pubs, you know, with pals, or at the work with pals. And that was Walter's forte, was these little poems that he had up his sleeve, you know, and he would just bring the house down with it.
He might go down as Scotland's worst poet, but I'll tell you what, he's very, very clever, and it takes a lot of talent to put these words together. I mean, I write the occasional poem and the occasional song, and I love it and I enjoy it. But this guy's got real talent.
He maybe is a kind of a forgotten icon, and I think he's kind of, his love of life and playfulness maybe shouldn't be forgotten, and maybe does deserve to basically have a second life.
We have been so lucky having Burns and other characters, but Walter is a special character. Walter is fantastic.
Walter McCorrisken, you can't get away from the memory of that brilliant, talented man who I was very proud to call a friend.
My father never thought of himself as being famous, and so therefore never thought of how he wanted to be remembered. But the closest thing I can think of as to how he could be remembered is in more punishing poems, the thoughts of Scotland's third bard. And there's some bits in there that sort of indicate that that's how I think he should be remembered. But how does one classify oneself? Some enthusiasts liken me to the old Cailliard school of writers. Others associate me with the Drystane Dykers. Yet some may say emphatically that I'm a midden raker. And Cailliard is a kitchen garden, Drystane Dykers are drystone wallers, and midden raker is a refuse scavenger.
Very shocked now a wee bit. Walking through life. As we walk through this life, we meet others on the way. That's why it's so important to change your socks each day. Thanks very much. Thank you.